This is a Devar Torah on Parshat Ki Saitzai. It's a parsha that has quite a few mitzvahs to it. At first glance, they don't look like they have that much in common. However, they can really be divided into two groups. One of them is mitzvahs of a person to a fellow person. And these are mitzvahs that one could work out logically, at least some of them. The second set are ones that have a purpose that could not be described or developed by logic. These are mitzvahs, however, that bring people closer to God and through increased kedusha, holiness. Now, the parsha starts off with a very unusual mitzvah. It's not even a mitzvah, more like command. Ki teitzei milchama al livecha v'nosanu Adonai Elohecha b'yadecha yeshivas shavin. When you go out to war against your enemy, it doesn't mean the 7 Canaanite nations. It means further wars of expansion. And by the way, these laws do not apply now because they only applied when there was a Jewish king. Since there is currently no king, these laws do not apply. And Hashem, your God, will deliver him into your hand, and you will capture his captivity. And then it goes on, Re'iti Shavia, Ashes Yafet Torah, Shechachata Ba Lechachta Lecha Leisha. And you will see among the captivity a woman who is beautiful in form, and you will desire her. You may take her to yourself for a wife. And there's a whole procedure that has to be discussed, which I'll be getting into later. And only with her agreement, she cannot be forced to marry the soldier who brought her home. She must be agreeable to it. And if she isn't, even after a period of persuasion, she cannot be sold or humiliated as a servant or slave. She must be freed and given her full freedom. The next mitzvah that goes on says a man has 2 wives. Even though polygamy is not currently practiced, it was allowed in the time of the Chumash of the Bible. And if you have one wife that you love and one wife that you hate, you can, and the firstborn son, the oldest firstborn son, is the wife you hate, he gets a double portion, being the firstborn. Interestingly enough, it then goes on that it shall be that on that day, it goes on for there, the strange mitzvah of Ben Sora V'Morah, the rebellious son, wayward and rebellious son. This is a boy who's between 13 and 13 and a half years of age. He does the following unacceptable acts. He steals money from his parents. He buys meat and wine. He guzzles the wine and eats the meat like a thief, which means once over lightly, rare, what we'd call rare today. And his parents take him to the Beis Din of their city court, and they warn that if he does this again, he's going to be facing the death penalty. He then goes and repeats the behavior. His father and mother have to bring him and speak in one voice. Literally, some understand as one voice, or they have to speak at the same time and be on board with this. They take him out, and he is executed. Now, this mitzvah of Ben Sora V'Morah is a mitzvah that debate in the Gemara whether this ever happened or not. The one opinion seems to be that there was never a Ben Sora V'Morah because of all the conditions connected to it. So why do we have to have it in the Torah, and why do we have to learn it? Because we get the merits, the skuyot, benefits of learning the laws, even if they're not practical. In fact, there's part of a sector, Gemara called Makos, dedicated to this subject. And there's an explanation. What do these three items have to connect? According to one opinion, the whole concept of the Eshes Torah Yefed, the beautiful woman, says that if you marry one of these women, what's going to happen is you're eventually going to hate her, and also a ben Sora of Amora will be produced from it. We saw an example of that with David Amalek and one of his sons who rebelled against him. It then goes on to another law that if a man shall commit a sin for which he has to be judicially executed, we even there we show respect for him. His body is hung after he is executed, but it has to be taken down the same day. There's even dignity for a serious criminal. And the next mitzvah that goes with this, after this, if your brother, means your fellow man or woman, loses any item, it can be an animal, it can be a produce of food, it can be garments, you must return it to him. And if it is the type of thing that's perishable, like food, or it's an animal which, if you have to keep feeding it, it could wind up being the food could wind up exceeding the value of the animal in the first place. Then you have to keep it in money, and it has to be, you have to advertise it, and you have to keep the money in trust. It's a very serious mitzvah. I'll be speaking about it more later. Now, also, if your friend's animal, your fellow person's animal, is seen falling on the road, you cannot hide from yourself. You have not only an obligation to help your fellow humans, you have an obligation to help your fellow humans' animals. There's then another mitzvah, which is that men shall not wear the garb of a woman, and a man shall not wear a woman's garment, or anyone who does this is an abomination to Hashem. Why is it against it? Because one thing that Hashem is against is immorality of any type, and doing this kind of action can lead to immorality. Now, another mitzvah is that if a bird's nest happens to be before you on any tree or ground, and the bird has young birds or eggs, and the mother is roosting on the young birds, you shall not take the mother with the young. Because if you do, you should surely send away the mother and take the young for yourself, so it'll be good for you and prolong your days in this world. Now, it's very interesting that even such a light mitzvah as that, you get prolonged long life, guaranteed life, yet on the other hand, you get long life. You get long life, and not only do you get long life, there's a deeper explanation of it that something to teach both people and angels is the following. What's going to happen if the mother bird loses its eggs? The mitzvah can be done in such a way that you can put the eggs back. But let's say the mother bird does not come back, and she's going to be crying, flying around looking for the eggs if you keep them, and she's going to be crying. And as the Midrash explains, the angel then goes to Hashem, and he said, look at the suffering of this poor mother bird. And God says to him, what are you talking about? You're complaining about that. What about the suffering of the entire people, or my people who have been in exile for a very long time? And my Shekhinah, that's the divine presence, is in exile with him. How much suffering is there both by me and the people, my people? And that's something one should be crying out for, even in heaven, much more than the mother bird. Now come another reasonable mitzvah, that you should not, that when you build a new house, you got to put a fence around the roof. And this one again makes sense because you're protecting people from injuring themselves. Again, this is a mitzvah connected to your neighbor. Now come two mitzvahs that, or three that don't seem to make sense. One of those is you shall not sow in your vineyard with a mixture of different seeds, and that you plant and the produce of the vineyard becomes forbidden. You should not have a ox and donkey plow together. And that one on a basic level, I'll be speaking about it more on a deeper level, makes sense because the ox is a much stronger animal, and it would be unfair to the donkey. Also, the food that the ox eats, it's since it's an animal that chews its cud, the donkey's going to have to watch the ox eating while it's going to go hungry, and that's also tormenting to it. Also, you should not wear combined fibers of wool and linen together. However, anything that God prohibits in a different way, he permits it. One is allowed to wear it's called a fringe garment, with a wool garment with fringes of cotton attached to it. You can't have them together, but you can have them next to each other. It then goes into the laws of Moitzi Shemer, falsely accusing somebody, particularly accusing a woman that she was not pure at the time of her marriage. There's a whole procedure with it. The laws then go into the laws of adultery and also into laws of sexual assault and the consequences for the perpetrator of such horrible crimes. It also goes into different categories of people who could not become converts. One, for example, is a mamzer, is a child produced from an adulterous union. Though Hashem cannot marry a regular Jew, however, as is explained in the Midrash, Hashem arranges that this man will have a woman who's also a mamzeres, and even if it's from one end of the world to the other, he will make sure that they come together. And that doesn't mean that in many other ways he cannot have high status, still become a Talmid Chacham. And you're not allowed to marry an Ammonite or Moabite. Those were two nations who were cruel to the Jews when they were going across the desert. You would not allow them through their land, even if they're willing to pay for the food and water. And you can't have 10 generations. And the question is, they also involved with Bilam. Question is, what happened? And how was Ruth able to marry into the Jewish people if she was a Moabite? Explained that only applied to the men. They were the ones who were cruel. Normal accommodations for people and allowing people into the country was that of man or not the woman, so they were innocent. It talks about main purity of the camp, even when one's in the army. If there's a runaway slave, you can't return him. You can't return him to his master. He must dwell with you. You must take care of him. Also, it prohibits prostitution, any type of other promiscuous behavior. You're also, again, this is also one of humanity. You're not allowed to take and give loans on interest. And if you do make a vow to give gifts to Hashem, anything that comes out of your mouth you must keep. And it also allows you, if you're in your neighbor's land, to eat, or if you're a worker, to eat grapes or the growth of the land, but you can't take in the bucket and you can't take it away with you. It then goes into the laws of divorce. Again, very understandable. And if the woman is divorced by the first husband, she has a second husband who either divorces her or dies. She's not allowed to go back to the first husband. It then goes on to think that there are certain things you can't take as security for a loan. And you cannot embarrass somebody. If somebody's outer garment, today would be a coat, cloak, then it's security. You must let them have it at night to sleep in, but you can't, in the morning, you have to wait outside. You cannot humiliate people. And also it says you can't take judgment against the convert or an orphan. And of course, you got to remember you were slaves in Egypt. Also, there's laws of certain part of your agricultural produce in different ways has to be left for the poor, the widow, and the orphan, and the convert. Also, there's a thing that if a person commits certain crimes, they will get lashes. And then there's a very unusual mitzvah that if a brother dies and there's two brothers, and one of them dies childless, then the surviving brother, either the oldest one or the next oldest one, must marry the widow, and the first child will be in the name and in the soul of the one who died without the childless. And if he refuses to do his obligation, then there's a whole ceremony called chalitza. Today, because we did not fail, at least for the last couple of 1,000 years, that a person cannot do it with the right intention, everybody is obligated to do chalitza. It goes into other laws of assault of a wife defending her husband against another man, and your weights and measures, you must keep the same consistent in both your business and at home. You cannot, there must be honest business and honest understanding, and you must be fair. Again, equity between people, also avoidance of machloket. And it ends with talking about the mitzvah Zoche Sheh Asa Lach Amalek B'derek Tzeitzvam the Mitzrayim. You remember what Amalek did to you on the way when you were leaving Egypt, and that you should never forget what he did. I will be going back into that in more detail in a little while. Now, I want to go through some of the mitzvahs we talked about. The first mitzvah of the captive woman is dealing with the captive woman is a very unusual one. The question is, Rashi explains that a person is allowed, a soldier, he sees a beautiful woman, to take her, bring her home. Whole procedure, she must get out of her nice garments. She must let her hair and nail grow, make her as unattractive as possible. If he still wants her and she's willing to convert, he converts her to being Jewish, and he can take her as a wife only with her approval. If she refuses, she must, as I said, let free. Now, question is why? Rashi says it's a giving into the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. Even all the members of the army back then were also Dikim, righteous people, Talmudic, very learned. Why would they be doing it? As Rashi explains, it's the Yetzer Hara. But even if you have the Yetzer Hara, there still remains a question that does not seem like a full explanation. As is explained in the Zohar, the Or Chaim, famous commentary on the Chumash Bible, and by the in Shar Pesukim and the Arizal and the Kutei Torah, that there's something much deeper going on here. Why would a Talmud Chacham be attracted to a beautiful woman? And it's explained that what kind of beauty are we talking about here? There could be spiritual beauty, or there could be physical beauty. If one is pursuing her for physical beauty, and after the 30 days takes her as a wife, with only those intentions, that will lead to Ben Sora of Gomorrah, the rebellious son, and the hated wife and rebellious son, with all the consequences that can cause some problems. However, if one is not doing that at all, but is attracted to her spiritual beauty. Now, what does spiritual beauty mean here? Spiritual beauty means she has a holy soul, a holy Shema, that happened to be placed in the body of this woman, of one of our enemies. And if he's truly doing it for that reason, and she at that point wants to become a convert, it means she was in fact the righteous soul, and it's not only talking about removing the garments. Is not simple for reasons that she shouldn't be attractive. It's also to help her come to conversion, wanting to become Jewish, and getting rid of the things that attached her to the impure society she came from. And similar understanding with letting her hair and nails grow. If she does become righteous, it means she was always a holiness soul to begin with. Now, what's the even bit of a deeper meaning of this is that when Adam Rishon and Chava committed the sin of eating from the Eitz Hadas Tov and Ra, all the neshimas souls that were to come from them became good and evil became mixed. Before that they had been separate, and the good and bad became problematic, became mixed, and therefore all of the neshama souls were mixed with the klipot, forces of spiritual impurity that are powered by holiness. In this case, a soul that is holy but is trapped within these klipot. By her being captured and her undergoing this change, it breaks the klipot and allows a very holy neshama of this woman to come to her full potential. And therefore, on that deeper meaning, it can be positive. In that case, there will be righteous children. There won't be Ben Sora of Amara, and they won't be the hated wife. Now, interestingly enough, let's look at the Senate concept of Ben Sora V'Mora. At the end of the day, even though Ben Sora V'Mora, why do I say Ben Sora V'Mora? Is because it's interpreted because it says Ben Sora V'Mora in the Bible, in the Chumash, it means Ben and not Bat. So girls were not capable of this type of behavior, or even if they did perform it, they weren't punished for it. And this is one example of what you might call preemptive justice. To prevent them, why do it? Because if this is what he's doing between 13 years plus, what's he going to be doing by the time he gets older? And he'll be committing much worse sins. So better to remove him. We see two other examples of this type of extraordinary extrajudicial or non-case extrajudicial killing somebody for something that's only in potential. One of them is if somebody tunnels into your house from underneath to rob you, you're allowed to kill him or her, unless he happens to be your father, and self-defense, because if he's tunneling, it means he's more afraid of man and has no fear of God. Otherwise, he'd come through the door or the window, and therefore he would be ready to do anything, including murder. We assume the one case, again, as an exception, is assumed that no father is going to kill his own child. And this is only if they break in at night. We see another case of what's called a rodef. If you see somebody pursuing somebody to either murder them, to rape a woman, homosexually assault a man, you're allowed to kill them. But the only way if out of range of you being able to physically tackle them, you're allowed to kill them, again, to protect the victim and also to prevent them from having worse offenses. Better they be killed first. The laws of this are also rodef. One is allowed, if somebody's threatening one's life, one is allowed to kill in self-defense. There's many other laws deriving from this, but that will be for another time, of the Torah. And then, so that's another example. Now, two more mitzvahs I'd like to talk about. These ones are getting more practical, again, more understandable, is that if you can't return it to your neighbor, you must take it, the lost object, and again, you can sell it. If it's going to either decay, like food, or feeding the animal is going to be more than the cost of the animal, which is unfair to the person who lost it, you do have an obligation to advertise it. It used to be in the courts when there was a system of courts in Israel. Now it's usually in synagogues, yeshivas. And the question is, this is a very significant mitzvah, because what happens when one doesn't honor it? Protecting one's the property is so important that if one does not follow this halacha, as explained in the Sharapolskim, Psukim, that a person, when they die, will not be able to come in to heaven, and they will have to go back for another Gilgul, another lifetime reincarnation. And normally when a person's committed a violation of a positive commandment, something you're supposed to do, but not something they're prohibited from doing, they will normally get the help, what's called an ibur. When they come back, another soul will be there to assist them to get past that avera, sin. Except in this particular sin, they won't be granted that, because it's considered such a serious sin. In other words, not only an action against an individual directly, but against his property, then one has to do it the hard way. And And that is another one. Now, I would like to go into, which is the mitzvah that you shouldn't plow together, a shor and a chamor together. That's an ox and a donkey. Now, on the Parshat level, in the Sefer of Tamei Mitzvahs, the reasons for the mitzvahs, or of Shimon Bar Yochai, and partially based on him and the Arizal, it's explained that who does the shore represent? Shore represents the ox, represents Samael, the angel of darkness, the Yetzer Hara. And why do we say that? Because he's like a muad. A muad is somebody that deliberately causes damage. Like a shore that's never gored somebody before, you say it's an accident, they only have to pay half damages. If it's done it 3 times and has that inherent nature, you call it it's a man destroyer. And it's evil. However, as we explained, Yitzchak did not suffer from this. He was part of Abraham. And since all the negative aspects that Abraham inherited from his idol worshipping ancestors went to Ishmael, he had Kedusha, was pure. But there is other forces going on here. There was Lulit. She's been referred to as a negative evil force, she-devil. In any event, she represents a chamor. She's represented by the donkey. And that's part, and who's the spin-off of her, purity of her, is Ishmael. And the chamor, interestingly enough, was used by Abraham to transport the supplies they needed for the sacrifice of Yitzchak, Kedus Yitzchak. And these two represent Shor, and the chamor represent a Baal and the Shura. Baal, Samael, the danger, and the Yetzer Hara, the evil one. The Shura is the elite. Therefore, it's forbidden to mix them together. Those are the two sides of evil forces which will reinforce each other. Speaking with evil forces, I'd like to conclude with a brief comment on 2 things. Just before evil forces. One, the whole concept of Yibum is something that merits the Bar Torah on its own, and I will be speaking at it when we get to Parshas Yeshev and Sefer Bereshit. What's called in English Genesis. I would like to go on to Amalek. Now, what was the fundamental evil thing that Amalek did? His attack against the Jewish people was based on pure hatred. The Jewish people who were traveling through the desert did not come anywhere near him. It was a totally unprovoked sneak attack. He not only killed the poor people, the ones who did not have mitzvahs, rejected from the cloud of holiness, clouds of glory. He did something worse. He enticed more people out of the cloud, and he immediately killed them. Even though he was vanquished, he was not totally destroyed. And he also did something far damaging. Before that, after the miracles of Egypt and the crossing of the Red Sea, all the nations were terrified of Hashem and his people. After that, the nation said, you know what? Okay, Amalek lost, but if we use the right tactics, we'll eventually destroy the Jewish people, and we've seen that throughout our history and down to today. Now, what are we supposed to take from that? Well, from Amalek, in other words, all the forces, not recognition of God at all, denial that God exists, says that everything is random chance, and he's totally against everything that's been set out in this parsha, both mitzvahs of holiness and mitzvahs of one's fellow person to his fellow person. And if one keeps in mind to try to purify themselves and to go against these negative forces, will help our tshuva process in the month of Elul, and may we purify ourselves as set out by the many concepts and treat our fellow man and woman with dignity and respect. We should merit a very good Rosh Hashanah, New Year, Shabbat Shalom, and good Shabbos.